We're going to get started. We are the last session between you and drinks. So thank you for coming. My name is Jackie Comp. I run global sales for Knock Knock. And with me today is my colleague, Dr. Rolf Lindemann. And today we are going to be sharing with you real-world best practices for how people have made the journey toward passwordless. I just want to ask, how many people in this room actually have what you would call strategic initiative in your organization to reduce your reliance on passwords and move toward passwordless? Okay, fair amount of you. And out of those people, how many is it focused on your workforce? Okay, and how many is it focused on the consumer? Okay, so interesting split. So we're going to be sharing with you real use cases of customers, as I say, and you might wonder what qualifies us to have insights into best practices. And since many of you are in the identity community, you likely know that Knock Knock has been a leader in FIDO-based passwordless authentication since 10 years ago when we co-founded the FIDO Alliance with 5 other companies. And we have been working with major global brands, which we'll be sharing with you, over those 10 years to help them operationalize FIDO and all of the things you need to support a user journey. And we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot from those customers, and we have a solution that has incorporated that. And so we're going to be sharing that with you today. So likely if you're here, you are either starting that journey or depending on what you've started with, in theory, the idea of moving maybe even to FIDO. How many of you are intrigued by FIDO? Okay. The idea of moving away from legacy to key pairs that are more secure, more convenient for your users sounds very interesting. And customers come to us all the time and are really excited about the concept, but they don't know how to get from here to there. So basically from theory to practice. And they are looking for guidance on how to make that journey. And the good news is that not only is it possible, it's actually very practical, but it doesn't happen overnight. And if you attended Andrew Shikyar's presentation, you kind of heard similar things. Why? Well, first of all, you have a lot of legacy infrastructure, right? We like to call it a lot of spaghetti. And you just don't unfold that overnight. Also, it's behavior change, right? Everybody hates passwords, but they know how to use them, right? So getting your users to change their behavior. And typically, if you are taking a strategic approach to migrating to next generation authentication, it's a broader project of digital transformation that touches other parts of your stack. And so, there's a lot of alignment that has to happen there as well. But what we will show you is that you can get started and you can reap enormous benefits along the way. I like to call them little pots of gold along the way as you're reducing your reliance on passwords. I'm going to have my colleague, Dr. Rolf Lindemann, who's actually considered one of the foremost experts in the world on FIDO, share a little bit about this new paradigm and some best practices for how to even look at this approach.
Yeah, so thanks. If you look at the authentication, how it works today, we all have internalized that we send some secret from one side to the other. And you would be surprised how deeply that is rooted in regulations, in internal processes, and the way we are thinking about authentication today. And so what we are really doing today is a big shift, going from the bearer tokens on the left-hand side, you see, to something which is based on cryptographic key pairs on the right-hand side, where the keys are not shared, right? It's the private key which stays in your device, and it doesn't leave your device for good reasons, and it isn't stored on the server. And this is a big shift in the industry, and that's the wholesale upgrade we are talking about here. And if you can switch to the next slide. So sometimes we get asked, so what what's the point, right? So for a user, I'm now putting my finger on the sensor, but what does it really mean? It means two major things. The first one is I can do a two-factor authentication in a single step for the user. And this is a big difference to what we do today, right? So today it's entering passwords, and this is many steps already because it's many characters, and hopefully you remember the password, the right password for the right site. But now it's just a finger swipe. And the second thing is this is unphishable. Right? So that's another consequence of just the approach. We are not sending a secret over from here to there, which someone in the middle could just intercept and send over to the real site. We are doing it in a smarter way. And we don't have the time today to go into all the details, but this approach is phishing resistant. And this is a material difference to everything we have seen in the past. And this is the first approach, phishing resistant approach that really scales to the internet. And so that is what we are talking about today. Now, when we talk about those approaches to customers, especially now that this technology is pretty new still, customers typically come back with asking for, now what is UAF and FIDO and the maybe cable and CTAP and FIDO2 and web authentication, and they have all these technology-related questions. But sure, you need to learn about those things to some extent, but in reality, you need to focus on the use cases you have, and you shouldn't start with the technology first. Sure, you have to understand what the technology can deliver, but you really should start with looking into your use cases. So what are the things you want to get accomplished? Is it a sign and speed centric thing, right? Are you more focused about the security side of the house or the user convenience side? If phishing resistance, right, the security part, man-in-the-middle attacks, is it more a call center related thing, or is it a mobile app, or is it a web browser? And more on those lines which are relevant for the user to then at some point make it the choice which technology serves you best and which kind of combination of technologies, which it is in reality, will serve you best. And this is the main learning we have had through all the successful deployments we made in the past, is start with that, with the use cases first, and after that, make the technology selection points, the combinations of technology, then it will be a successful journey. And we will share some more insights with you now.
Great, thanks, Rolf. So once you've kind of made the decision, okay, this standards thing makes sense, right? We really want to address this in a strategic approach. We typically work with our customers through various stages. This isn't rocket science, but it's really important to follow the process. The first is, again, setting your strategic direction. What's your vision to the organization? Why are you talking about this strategically in terms of what value can it give to the organization and the various departments? You really want to take a strategic approach and not a tactical approach. Otherwise, you're going to really end up with a dead-end project. And we've had a lot of companies who've come to us and they took the, we're going to do this protocol and we're going to do this one thing, and then they realized that they ended up in a dead end. So that's the first step, is really understanding. And it usually involves a champion from the identity community that kind of understands this new world and is responsible for going and aligning stakeholders within the organization. We often start with a champion who says, this is the direction this company needs to go with, but now we have to align everybody. So you need to talk to your product teams. You need to talk to security if you're not from the security side, engineering, support. And you can really change the conversation. Usually when security goes and talks to the product teams about more security, we have something that's better security. What do they usually expect? That it's going to result in more what? Friction. Yes. This is changing the conversation. You're actually bringing a technology and a solution to the product team that is going to reduce friction for their users, done correctly. And so it's really important to align all your stakeholders. Then you do now, when you understand the strategic vision, now you need to sit down and say, okay, so this is the direction we want to go in long term. Here's why we're doing it. Everybody's on board. Where are we going to start? And we talk to a lot of companies to help figure them out. This is where, not being self-serving here, but having a partner who's done this before, doesn't have to be knock-knock, but can really help you understand what's possible, understand what you're trying to do, help you understand how the technology can support it, how our platform can support it, because what you also learn is that there's various things that you need to support the whole to operationalize it. Obviously, then you want to design your architecture and make sure that you do have a strategic infrastructure in place that you're comfortable putting in your data center. Again, this shouldn't be something that is tactically developed. This is going to become your authentication platform. And then this is a very important step, is detailing the user journey, right? You're changing behavior, especially if you're focusing on the B2C side. Out of the 5 use cases that we're going to be covering today, 4 of them are on the consumer side. And it's really important that you do it right, that you think through it. And again, we've got some best practices there as well. We just don't have time to go into it all. And then finally, you want to have a phased rollout. You want to go and test and have a way with your platform that you can focus and say, okay, we're going to go with this type of device, maybe this this type of situation, and you do some testing, and then you can kind of see how that goes, and then scale and scale. And usually what you find is that there's such enormous results, and I've got examples of that the rest of the organization is really excited to say, hey, let's explode this. This is great. What we're going to talk about right now is the companies that we worked with and what were the first use cases that they started with. So that is going to be our session here. Okay, so the first one is T-Mobile. T-Mobile is a great example of an early adopter that bought into the standards, years ago. And they're very proud of offering humans when you call their care center, but they also know that people really don't want to spend a lot of time on the phone. And they were dealing with a lot of account recovery with passwords. So they wanted to biometrically enable their devices. Again, this was when it was just becoming popular to biometrically enable your mobile apps. And they stepped back and they said, you know what, we really want to do this in a strategic way. We think the standard stuff is going to take off, so we want to put something in place that we can grow with. We also want to make it easier for us to support all the devices. So, having an SDK, an abstraction layer that just works on a device is going to cut our operational costs down. So they engaged with us, they implemented it. It was, very quickly adopted. They had a huge reduction in password resets from, I think it was 65 to 7% within the first few months. And as you can imagine, every 30 seconds that they're taking off the care center time is worth a lot of money with millions of calls. What's interesting is they then said, okay, this is great. Now let's add on to that so that when somebody does have to call the call center for some reason, we can cut down the time that the call center agent has to spend authenticating the user. What's your name? What's your phone number? What's your PIN? Where do you live? Right? And so they made it so that when you authenticate through their mobile app, you can actually pre-authenticate into the call center so that you don't have to go through all of those KBA type questions. Again, very successful. And they're I can't share everything because I'm under non-disclosure, but continuing to share or to extend the process of leveraging the investment that they made in this infrastructure. Now, I also can't tell you every customer in a public forum like this. I'm not authorized to share it, but this is a global bank who had an issue in one of their main regions with fraud, and so they required their customers to go to in-branch to perform a lot of the services. So you can imagine that wasn't very popular. So they came to us, and what they did was they, again, locked down their mobile app. Some of you say, well, we have Touch ID and Face ID and all of that, but very often it's just caching the password, or it's not necessarily a particularly secure way of doing it. So they leveraged our platform and FIDO and said to their customers, if you sign up for this, either the biometric or the PIN, because they even had a lot of devices that didn't support biometrics, and so we can do it with a PIN. And they said, if you sign up for it, we'll let you transact online and not have to go into the branch. Well, as you can imagine, it was very well received. Their app rating, very quickly soared. It's hard to get your app rating to go up that quickly. They won't share, as most companies won't, their actual fraud rates, but they told us that there was a significant reduction in fraud. So this is another thing to think about, is when you are looking to have more of your users enroll in this new way of doing things, if you give them an entitlement for doing it. I think T-Mobile even offered some data points or free Tuesday some things if you enrolled. So there are ways also of encouraging your users to use this more secure way if they're not the ones that are the first ones to go adopt using a biometric, let's say, on a phone or on a PC. Okay, this is my B2E use case. So this is for a workforce. This was very interesting. So TEPCO Power Grid came up with a new program where they wanted their maintenance workers to be able to get pictures of poles sent in by their customers, right? So if I'm a resident and I see something funky, I can send a picture in and it goes to the maintenance worker so that they could triage and say, oh, well, this is something that we need to get to right away, or this is something that could maybe be managed by the internal staff. The problem was that they had very stringent requirements for passwords. These were external users. They weren't going part of their single sign-on system. So they had very robust password requirements. And the business sponsor of this program said, it doesn't make sense for me to try to do business reform and have this program when my workers are going to be struggling to remember these highly complex passwords. So once again, they implemented stronger authentication, leveraging, whether it was on a PC or on a mobile device, leveraging the authenticators on those devices. And it was a huge success. They met all their KPIs because they had certain KPIs of success. And really a fabulous example of how stronger security, greater ease of use can support different initiatives. And that's why you want to talk to your business sponsors. What are they trying to accomplish? And come to them with a solution that helps them meet their business goals. That's beyond just the security aspect. There's the user experience aspect that is a big piece of it. Again, can't tell you who this is, but this is a fintech who obviously needs to protect their data, because as a fintech, they had a lot of financial information, and they found that a lot of the fraud was happening on the web application. And so not as much on their mobile device, but when people were coming in through their web app. And so they ended up adding a lot of complexity of OTPs and email OTP and SMS OTP when you tried to initiate the app. Was not very well received. So what they did was they did a test. They said, let's FIDO enable our web application, which means that the user, whether they're coming in through the mobile browser or they're coming in through their PC browser, they can leverage the authenticator on that device, right? It could be, if you have a Mac, it's a fingerprint, could be Windows Hello PIN, could be a Surface and Face ID. And what they found is, without really spending a lot of time on the UX, I mean, they spent enough time so that they were sure that they weren't going to confuse the user, because as we say, that user journey piece is an important part of it. But they did enough that they were comfortable with it, and they ended up getting 40% of the users that signed in. 40%, that's a fair amount. Remember, this is different from, a lot of us are used to using a biometric on our phone for the mobile app, but not as much on the PC. And so they had 40% of the people that were offered the choice signed up for it. And those guys reduced their sign-in time, or I should say increased the speed by orders of magnitude, 8 times. So it was a really great success, and now they're going back and they're saying, okay, let's spend a little bit more time. Now that we know that we've got something here, let's go back and see how we can continue to educate users and to entice them to take advantage of this. Okay, this is the last one, and I love this use case. So how many of you love doing your taxes? Literally, if you raise your hand, you need to be committed. So Intuit is, again, a really good example of a very forward-thinking company. They've done a lot in leveraging next-gen auth. And what was happening is people would come to sign up for TurboTax during tax season. Whoever remembers their password, right? You use it one time during a year. But when they were onboarding new users, they would ask them for the use, and they've said this publicly, so it's okay if I share it, username and password, and give me your phone number, and give me your email address, and now give me a password, and no, it's not enough characters, and now type it again. And what they found is that they had a high degree of transaction abandonment. Because you really don't want to be doing this anyway, and then you had friction on top of it. So the head of identity at the time said, we're asking our users to build a fort before they even put anything in it. They're just trying to see, do they want to use this application? So they ended up introducing what is called progressive profiling. And what they did instead was they said to the user, give me your phone number, swipe your finger, and gave them an account. This way, the next time the user came in, remember, you are with FIDO credentials in our platform, you're binding the user to the device. So the next time that user comes in, it's that same user's device, and yes, they have to unlock it with their fingerprint. And so then, as the user became more and more encouraged to sign up for the service, if they needed other information like an email address, et cetera, they could ask for it. They increased their onboarding very quickly by 10%. And if you talk to your product people, that's huge. Like each percentage typically is worth millions of dollars. So they were thrilled with the results of it. They also had much higher sign-in time, right? Because now you're just using your biometric to log in. So really successful example. And the first one they've started with, and they have many, now they've grown. And they've added it into a lot of other products. They have Mint and TurboTax, QuickBooks, and so they're adding it in different ways into various products that they have. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague to summarize some solutions.
Some more learnings, right? So first, just to repeat, it's don't do a science project. Start with the use cases. Focus on the business benefits you want to get out of that. And then look at companies which have a proven track record for that, and don't do that the first time, right? They don't do their own research while you want to deploy a technology. The second thing, what we learned, even you think you know exactly how the authentication and what the rules are, they are fluent, right? They will change. So you need some kind of adaptive authentication anyways to make sure you can keep up with the changing rules and the changing business requirements around those without changing the code necessarily on your platform, because that's just overhead you want to avoid. And the last thing is, though you should start with a use case, you will not end up with one use case. You will end up with multiple ones. So don't take an approach which is very tactical. Look into future things, expandability, that you have a platform to can build on and add new capabilities as you need them, as opposed to waiting for vendors to add those.
Right. And thank you. And I would say that, and this is really just summarizing what Rolf just said, but if any of you, how many people have heard about passkeys? Okay, probably pretty much everyone here. So, the FIDO specification is going to continue to evolve. And so that's the other thing is, having a platform that is going to keep up with all of these advancements so that you don't have to worry about it. It'll just work. And you don't have to worry about the protocol. Again, you focus on the use case. If you are interested in more information, that's my email address. There's a lot of other, we have, BBVA and Verizon and lots of other use cases that we could have, NTT Docomo. I mean, we've got a lot of other use cases we could share. We just thought these were different enough. And so we picked these. And we'd love to learn about anything that you're trying to accomplish and share with you how you can get there. I know we're at the end. Any questions for us?
I'm just curious,
Oh, she's going to give you a microphone,
Hi.
I think. Oh, okay, she's got it, and then we'll hand it over to you. Sorry.
Quick question. We talk about FIDO authentication, but how are we expanding on identity proofing? Just because, I mean, yes, we can do FIDO biometrics, but more and more, just being able to identify the users and verify the users becomes more important, especially as we talk about zero trust. So how is FIDO enabling that type of capability or assisting that type of capability?
So it's rather orthogonal to it. So how do you do the ID proofing is one thing. How you recognize that this is the same person coming to you the next day is the other thing, right? And we have seen a lot of variety in the industry. If you are a cloud storage provider, you couldn't care less about the user's real identity. If you're a bank, you are regulated to know about that, right? And so FIDO doesn't care how you verify the user's identity, do the ID proofing, which means FIDO is suitable for the cloud storage providers as well as for the banks, because they can apply whatever they have to do for the ID proofing and whatever they are doing for ID proofing today. Meaning two different things might have two different solutions. At some point you bind them all together, and this is how you integrate the ID proofing with authentication technologies. And typical authentication platforms have integration points into ID proofing, and they will just allow you to integrate with ID proofing vendors which do it remotely, etc.
As an example, too, like we have some of our customers integrate with ID proofing. We obviously have all of the open API and hooks for those. Some integrate. There's different methods that people have. So, but ID proofing is definitely, it's a great question because it is an important, you want strong ID proofing and binding to then have strong authentication. There was a question here.
Okay. Hi. I was curious from the different use cases, how many of those companies had other strong authentication methods before they introduced passwordless or biometrics, and if they started to coexist after that, or if it was more of a...
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. So most of these companies that were the early adopters are in regulated industries where security was very important. So they were trying to achieve multi-factor with the traditional legacy methods. So password plus OTPs, those sorts of things. However, we all know that those are very phishable. And so really the goal was how do they get to an unphishable credential? And this was the way that they did it. Now, the other point you made is that you don't necessarily get rid of the password overnight. And this is what we were talking about earlier. So, there is a coexistence of passwords with it. And you know what? You're going to have diehards that are just kicking and screaming, never going to get rid of their password. But that doesn't mean you can't get great benefits. It's kind of like saying, well, I have no locks on my doors or my windows, and I can't do them all, so I'm just not going to do any. You can get started and get great benefits by starting to lock things down. And the user experience side, as I have to say, is a huge benefit. I know we're running out here, so. Okay, we're out. Guess what? It's time for drinks.
Thank you all for
Thanks,
coming.
everybody.
Before you go, please take a minute to fill out the session surveys in the Identiverse app. It really helps us make sure we're giving you the content you want. And now please go enjoy the reception over in the expo hall.